Okay, I will say hello and welcome officially to the 2026 Interim and Formative Assessment, or IFA, webinar series. This is webinar 2, CAASPP and ELPAC Interim Assessments. And my name is Megan Bell. I'm a program manager at WestEd, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar this morning. It's designed especially for educators, and it's all about the California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, or CAASPP, and the English Language Proficiency Assessments for California, or ELPAC. That is one of the hardest words to actually say. So the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. So we do have a few notes about this training before we get started. The PowerPoint file and a separate resource guide with links are provided on the Padlet, and we'll be dropping links to those materials as well. You likely received an email with the materials to download in addition. We're going to use Padlet today, and we ask that you post all questions to Padlet. That Padlet will remain available after today's session, and we'll go over Padlet in just a few slides. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be posted on the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage in about 2 weeks. So here's how we plan to spend our 2 hours together this morning. We'll begin with a welcome section where we'll go over some housekeeping and orient you to today's session. Then we will build our assessment literacy and then explore the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. We'll take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll spend some time examining standardized and non-standardized uses of interim assessments. Then we'll explore the California Educator Reporting System, or CERS. And then finally, we'll dive into resources for practical application of interim assessments before we wrap up for the day. So let's begin with Section 1, welcome. This training is brought to you by the California Department of Education, or CDE, in partnership with ETS, WestEd, and the 2 amazing facilitators who we will meet in just a few slides. So our 2026 IFA webinar series consists of 3 webinars. Webinar 1, the formative assessment process and tools for teachers, was held earlier. It explored some of the ways California interim assessments and tools for teachers website can be used as resources to support the formative assessment process in your classroom. You're here today for webinar 2, those CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments, and we'll focus on some of the different ways the interim assessments can be used to help inform teaching and learning. Webinar 3 is coming up. It is our educator and panel and shared practices. It was introduced last year for the first time. This year, it will be a 90-minute live panel discussion in which you'll get to hear from your colleagues as they share their practices, their outcomes, their lessons learned around using the interim assessments and tools for teachers website and related resources at their sites to improve instruction. There's still space. If you want to register for webinar 3 and you haven't yet, you can sign up on that coming and on-demand trainings webpage. And then all 3 webinars we're going to offer again this fall. We also offer 5 live interim assessment hand scoring workshops. They represent the CAASPP and ELPAC content areas, and they have a separate registration from the 2026 IFA webinar series. They're also only offered once this month in July. So they're coming up. There are on-demand versions which are available year-round, but you do get a lot out of the hand-scoring workshops. So the hand-scoring workshops really focus on the hows and whys of hand-scoring, and participants get to actively engage in the hand-scoring process. You'll get to engage with your colleagues in small groups to share thinking, best practices, and really discuss some instructional implications of using the interim assessments. So all those workshops, they're each 2 hours in length, and they apply the same hand scoring process, but to a specific content area. And we talk about some considerations related to that content area. Workshop 1 is focused on English language arts / literacy, or ELA. Workshop 2 is mathematics. Workshop 3 is the California Science Test, or CAST. And there are 2 workshops for ELPAC broken up by domain. So the first, workshop 4A, focuses on the speaking domain, and workshop 4B focuses on the writing domain. The workshops are not recorded because we do use actual interim assessments and scoring materials. So we do encourage you to sign up for whichever content area is most relevant to you. And for more information about either the IFA webinar series or those hand scoring workshops, or to register, you can go to the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage on the CAASPP and ELPAC website. So those links should have been dropped into the chat box for you. And they're also available on your handout or your resource guide, and they'll be available on the Padlet, which we'll look at in just a sec. So we want to briefly review the materials that you have today. So as I mentioned earlier, you may have received an email with a link to download this slide deck and the handout from CDE's X Files webpage. If you did not, we just dropped the link to the materials in the chat. You can download them now. There's one handout for this training, and it is a resource guide. And the guide offers an overview of each section in today's webinar. It also provides space for you to take notes, and most importantly, links to all the resources mentioned in each section. And the resource guide also includes a set of directions and questions for a guided activity at the end of today's webinar. So we talked about Padlet. We do use Padlet for today, and ask again that you post all your questions to Padlet. We've dropped the link to it in the chat for you. And we answer questions in real time. Now, some questions do take a little bit longer to respond to. So if you don't see a response to a question at the end of today's session, do check back in a day or two. We will not be monitoring the Padlet for new questions at the conclusion of today's session. So if you do have a question, we ask that you email caloutreach@ets.org rather than posting any questions to our Padlet. So let's go ahead and navigate to the Padlet, and we'll do a quick orientation of it. So Padlet is divided into several columns. That first column is called meeting information, and it contains all things related to this webinar. So there's a link to the materials, there's information about the recordings, attendance verification, and that upcoming and on-demand trainings website link. The second column, webinar and technical support, is where you can alert us to any issues that you're having. And then as we scroll over, you'll see that each section of today's webinar has its own column. And within each column, when we mention a resource, there's a link on Padlet, same as on your resource guide. So let's go over how to post a question today. Every column has a plus sign at the top. So you'll select that plus sign in whichever column you'd like to post your question. To open that pop-up box, you'll type your question and then select the pink publish button in that upper right-hand corner. So again, please post everything to Padlet, and that's because we're going to have the chat feature disabled for most of today's webinar. There's a couple places where we'll turn it on and ask you to share your ideas to chat. But in the meantime, please do make sure that you post your questions to Padlet. That also ensures that when you ask a really good question, everybody gets to see it and gets to see the information shared. Okay, so speaking of, we're going to go ahead and start with our first welcoming activity. So we're going to open up the chat feature, and we would like for you to please respond to the question, what is the most creative or engaging way you've assessed your students? And that can go into the chat box. Please make sure that your response in the chat box is set to respond to everybody or everyone, and not just the host and panelists. Okay. Some responses are coming in. So we've got booklets, PBLs, notice and wonder, debate, projects, booklets, factile. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm curious. Labs, portfolios and defenses. Someone had a competitive mock trial for Much Ado About Nothing. I love it. Quizzes, flashcards combined with physical activities. Great. Graffiti stems, self-assessment, games, word clouds to create good discussions. Yeah, these are fantastic. Shared creation of rubrics based on standards. I love it. Okay. Wow, there are so many ideas in here. A Socratic smackdown. I love it. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Keep posting. We'll keep the chat open for just a little bit so you can continue to share those great ways that you've assessed. But we want to move on to our learning goals, because just like teachers with students in the classroom, we want to be clear about our learning for today. So our learning goals are that by the end of the webinar, you will understand the different ways in which the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments can be used to inform instruction, and the available resources to support the use of CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments in the classroom. And how will we know if we're successful? We hope that by the end of our time today, you can identify and use different CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments to inform instruction in the classroom and use available resources to support the use of CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments in the classroom. Okay. We do have two amazing facilitators with us who will guide you through the rest of today's webinar. So we have with us today Stephanie Fortunato, who is an educational consultant in instruction, assessment, and professional learning, and Nancy Veach, who's a retired assistant superintendent of educational services from Evergreen Union School District. They'll both introduce themselves as they come on, and now it is my pleasure to hand the rest of this webinar over to both of them, Nancy and Stephanie.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome everyone. As Megan said, my name is Nancy. 30 years in education as a teacher, principal, and then assistant superintendent. And I've had the pleasure of working on WestAd assessment literacy since 2014. And so it's my pleasure to be with you here today. So in this section, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about assessment literacy before I turn it over to my colleague Stephanie, who's going to talk with us about the CAASPP and ELPAC. So first, what we want to do today is really make sure that there's a shared understanding of assessment literacy and that we all understand why it's important for educators to be assessment literate. We know that assessment literacy is foundational for our understanding of the assessments that are available in the CAASPP and the ELPAC systems. So if you joined us for webinar 1 on Tuesday, some of this content may look familiar. Let's talk a little bit about defining it. So this slide, which was created, gives us an understanding of assessment literacy. Assessment literacy is the knowledge and skills needed to design or select, implement, interpret, and use assessments appropriately to gather evidence of student learning and clearly communicate the results to all educational partners. And these educational partners might include students, parents, guardians, teachers, leaders, and other stakeholders that are involved in making decisions about student learning. We want you today to keep this definition in mind as we move through the rest of today's session so that we can talk about how building assessment literacy at your site can contribute to a more successful assessment practice. And if you're interested in learning more about what assessment literacy entails, I would encourage you to look at the link that you can find in Padlet that is for the National Task Force on Assessment Education for Teachers. This is both in the resource guide and on the Padlet, and it's a great read that kind of gives you that background. So let's talk about, why do we assess? You gave some great ideas about how you already capture assessment, but at the most basic level, assessments gather evidence of student learning so that they can inform instructional decisions. And these decisions occur at different levels: in the classroom, at a school or district, at a local educational agency, or for the educational system at the state or national level. And they're made by different users within our educational system, including teachers, students, families, coaches, school district leaders, superintendents, and state policymakers. So if you think about the types of decisions that a classroom teacher needs to make during the day or throughout the week, or even over the course of the year, to ensure that the students meet the end-of-year learning goals as defined by the state standards, we have those types of assessments. But also consider, and some of you might be joining us today that sit in a different seat, there are needs of a superintendent or assistant superintendent who are trying to determine how well the schools in their district or LEA, or even across the state, are helping students meet the end-of-year learning goals. So one single assessment is not likely to provide the data that our classroom teacher and our superintendent need to inform their educational decisions. So keep in mind today that there is no one size fits all with assessment. And for that reason, as we talk about building our understanding of assessment literacy, we want to really embrace this idea of a comprehensive assessment system. This definition was created by Joan Herman. We shared the same definition in webinar 1, so it may look a bit familiar. I want you to think about this and all of the words that encompass it. A comprehensive assessment system is a comprehensive, coherent, and continuous system of assessment that provides mutually complementary views of student learning. ensures that assessment within each cycle is focused on the same ultimate goal, that achievement of standards. And it pushes instruction and learning in a common direction. And you can find a full source citation for this in your resource guide. We really want to hear from you today about which of the words or phrases within that quote really resonate with you. So we are going to have you participate in a VVox poll. So there is a link to what you can find that is in the chat. You can also take your phone and you can scan this QR code that's there and pull it up. And we want you to type in the phrase or definition that most resonates with you. And this may vary depending upon your role and the use of data that you have within the system. So let's give you just a minute to go ahead and do that. It looks like 69 of you are already on there giving us your feedback. I'm going to participate too, because that's always fun. If you're doing it from your phone, you can already see the word cloud building. We'll be able to show that to you here in just a minute on the next slide, but we want to give everyone a chance to respond. Wonderful. This is such a great definition when you think about how many different people you need to use assessment data. Fantastic. So what I'm noticing coming up on the word cloud that we'll see on the screen here in a minute, but you can see it on your phone, right? Continuous. Continuous is large. And what you'll notice is the words that have been put in most frequently are going to come up as the largest words here. So continuous is coming up. Coherent. You'll also notice goal is coming up. Complementary, right? We want to make sure that those are complementary. I love how this word cloud is building. And I hope you'll find that also exciting. Great, so many of you, and we've got almost everybody participating. So what I'm seeing now is still continuous is the largest word. We have complementary, coherent, goal, focused, comprehensive are also really coming up as things that are resonating with you. Focused, fantastic. Thank you so much for participating. And it looks like it's starting to slow down, so we will get to this next slide. Still seeing continuous. All right, we closed it. So look at that beautiful thing that we all did together. What a great way that even though we can't all be in the same room together, we were able to participate together. So continuous, complementary, coherent, right? For that ultimate goal, obviously, of focusing on student learning, this achievement of standards. Thanks so much for participating. We hope you enjoyed that today. So we have different types of assessments. This comprehensive assessment system is made up of all of these different types of assessments that are used to elicit evidence about a specific aspect of student learning at different scales and at different times of the year. The assessments within this comprehensive system work together to measure different aspects of student learning as defined by the state academic content standards, the Common Core, and the California Next Generation Science Standards. They can include summative, interim or benchmark, screening, diagnostic, and classroom assessments. And the data yielded by each type of assessment helps paint a more complete story about student learning, serving as an indicator of when things are likely working well and when more support might be needed. So not everyone needs all the data that's produced by the comprehensive assessment system. You might only need data from one or two assessments within your role, but this array of different types of assessment data are needed to support all the needs within the educational system. So we're going to talk about these three different types of assessments in a little more focused detail. To the next slide. The assessment types can be differentiated by several factors. And this is a great chart that's adapted from Chapter 8 of the California ELA ELD framework. And across the top, you'll notice we have assessment type, and then we have scale or grain size, meaning the volume of learning expectations that are measured by the assessment. We then are going to talk about the timing, which is when and how often. And then finally, that priority for instruction. How actionable is the information in making student-level teaching and learning decisions in the classroom? So let's first talk about summative, and we're going to go across this chart that's here. Summative assessments have the largest grain size, and they're given after learning, and they're the lowest priority to inform student instructional decisions in the classroom. They're designed to give us information about students' learning relative to goals like the state content standards after learning has occurred. They're intended to monitor and evaluate student achievement at the group level so that we can inform program and school level improvement planning and provide an overall picture of how well is the system preparing students to meet the learning expectations. The next column down is interim. Interim assessments are medium grain size. So that means they're given between those learning cycles, and they have a medium priority to inform teaching and learning in the classroom. They're usually administered at specific intervals during the year so that we can compare student learning against a set of learning standards or objectives. They serve as progress monitoring tools so that we can identify students who might benefit from additional instruction or supports, or we can even change those learning trajectories during the school year. We're going to focus on these interim assessments today and really take that deep dive. So understanding their place within the California assessment system is really important. Finally, on this chart, you'll notice the last column that is there. And this is the formative assessment process. This has the smallest grain size because it's used in the moment during instruction. And some of you typed those examples in the chat box today. It has the highest priority for informing teaching and learning in the classroom because this, unlike the interim and summative assessments, the formative assessment process is really not an assessment or a tool. It is not an assessment or a tool. It's really this process that we go through where we gather evidence of student learning during instruction to inform immediate next steps. It can be used at any point during instruction so that we can adjust teaching and learning in the moment. And it can help make learning visible for both teachers and for the students that they teach. The CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments are tools that can be used to support this process in the classroom. And we'll explain that later in a bit. So for our last slide here in section 2, if you have any general questions just about assessment literacy, if you would go over to the Padlet and post those questions there, we'll make sure we address those today. And then what we'll do is make sure that we get those answered. And so, Stephanie, are you noticing any questions so far?
Hey, Nancy. Yeah, I don't see any questions for section 2 just yet.
Awesome.
I've seen some things coming in for some, other technical support and such, but this is such a great place to just remind everyone we're in here, we're kind of monitoring the Padlet, and we really encourage you to be able to get in there and ask questions, and we're here to be able to help to answer them along the way. So
exactly. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. She's going to take us a little bit deeper into this, and I'll continue to monitor Padlet. Stephanie.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Fortunato. I'm so excited that you're joining us this morning. I'm excited to be here with you. I started my career in education over 26 years ago. I was a classroom teacher and administered both CAASPP and ELPAC assessments, and then moved on to my role as a district assessment coordinator and a coordinator at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. And I'm also such a proud member of California's state network of educators, working with educators like yourself all across the consortium to be able to create lessons that can be found in tools for teachers. So we're excited to move on to our next section 3 on CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. And this section here is going to provide an overview of the interim assessments that are available from the state of California. So this includes the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. And so we're going to explore how they're organized across the different content areas and also provide information on some resources to support their use. And very exciting news, hot off the press. I want to share with you that for the 25-26 school year, we have some information that came from the CDE that there were just shy of 14 million interim assessments that were administered over the 4 content areas across almost like 1,600 school districts this last year. So it's so exciting. The work that you're doing is incredible. And we look forward to hearing from you, sharing how you've been accessing the interim assessments and how you plan to use them for this next year. So exciting news. All right, now the interim assessments are part of California's comprehensive assessment system, which includes CAASPP and ELPAC. Now, there are many other types of assessments, but in this section, we're going to focus on the interim assessments in the system. So CAASPP includes the Smarter Balanced interim assessments for ELA and mathematics, and also the CAST interim assessments. And the ELPAC includes interim assessments for students whose first language is anything other than English. The CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments are available for year-round use. They're optional assessments that are provided for free from the state to all California LEAs. So that's one of the greatest things, free to access, right? Now, it's important to note that the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments are not part of the state or federal accountability system, and results are not reported to the CBE. So let's talk next about interim assessment use. The CAASPP interim assessments are designed to be used flexibly with students in the classroom to help support teaching and learning. They are purposefully designed to support teaching and learning in two ways. First, as assessments of learning, and as assessments also for learning, which we'll dive into in just a moment. They can be used with school staff for professional learning purposes, much like we will do in the 2026 interim assessment hand scoring workshops that are going to be taking place this summer and again in the fall. Now, LEAs are encouraged to use the interim assessments in ways to support their needs, but it's important to remember that they are considered secure materials. So let's talk about those security considerations. The interim assessments and their related materials are all considered secure. So this means that any use, display, or distribution of the interim assessments or the scoring materials that results in access for persons beyond LEA staff and students is considered a compromise of assessment security. So this includes artificial intelligence or AI resources. Now, the scoring materials and resources are available in the Test Operations Management System, or what we often refer to as TOMS, and they're available only to educators in California LEAs. The interim assessments are considered student-facing and teacher-facing only. So that means that the interim assessment items and the scoring materials should not be shared with parents or guardians, or they should not be reproduced in any form for use outside of the classroom or posted online or in any other public place, and should not be used with any AI tools. Now, all of the materials that we're accessing today are public-facing documents that can be shared. So we want to quickly define two terms that we'll be using through this next section: standardized and non-standardized administration. Now, a standardized administration mimics the conditions under which the state summative assessment is administered. So students complete the entire interim assessment individually and independently on a computer from start to finish. And these are assessments of learning. Now, a non-standardized administration is any administration that differs from how the state's assessment is administered. So some examples are having students who might work together on a computer to complete an interim assessment, maybe even having students respond individually to only the performance task portion on paper, or even displaying a rubric and having students analyze their own written responses. Now, a non-standardized administration allows educators to elicit evidence of student learning as part of the formative assessment process. And so these would be considered assessments for learning. Now, if you didn't attend webinar 1, we encourage you to watch the recording if you'd like to learn more about the formative assessment process. And we'll go into greater details about standardized and non-standardized administrations and provide some examples when we get to section 4 today. Now, as we mentioned that the CAASPP interim assessments, they're designed to support flexible use as both assessments of learning and assessments for learning. So when used as an assessment of learning, the purpose of the interim assessment is to measure learning in relation to a group of learning goals that are defined by the content standards. So they measure a student's progress toward end-of-year learning goals, and they provide an opportunity to determine whether additional learning supports may be necessary. So you can use the CAASPP interim assessments in a standardized or non-standardized administration as an assessment of learning. Now, when they are used as an assessment for learning, the interim assessments become tools that support the formative assessment process in the classroom. Now, the interim assessments can be used to identify student gaps or perhaps some misconceptions about specific aspects of learning in real time. They can help make learning visible for students and teachers. To use the interim assessments as assessments for learning, they must be used in a non-standardized administration. So let's go ahead and pause. We're going to take a quick poll. And let us know, for which purposes are you considering using the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments? And we ask that you select from the following options. Are you thinking about using them to gauge student readiness for upcoming content or standards? Maybe to determine academic supports for students that might need them, or even to elicit evidence of understanding from students, or perhaps to provide students with opportunities for collaboration, or maybe you're not sure just yet at this point. So we're going to go ahead. A link to this poll has been dropped into the chat box. And go ahead and let us know whether you use the interim assessments in a standardized or non-standardized way. I'm also going to go ahead and participate in our see. Lots of great results that are coming in already. Fantastic. Keep in mind, you can select perhaps more than one purpose along the way as well. We'll give you another moment here to complete. We've got almost everyone here who's in there actually responding to these. Fantastic. All right. Wow. Let's take a look at those results. Oh, that next slide there. Wow, wow, wow. I can see we've got 70% who are using to determine academic supports that students might need. Absolutely. And coming in at a close second to be able to elicit evidence of understanding from students. I love this. Great purposes that you're going to be looking at. Maybe you already have, or maybe some. I can see some folks too, maybe you're just not sure at this point, right? You're already kind of considering and thinking how you might use them for the upcoming school year. All right, fabulous. Well, thank you for participating in that. All right, so let's quickly go ahead. We're going to compare the different interim assessment for CAASPP and ELPAC, and we'll go into more detail about the smarter balance, about CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments over the next several slides. But it's important to understand the main differences and similarities in the structure and also availability in different content areas. Now, the smarter balance interim assessments for ELA and mathematics are available in 3 different types, with and without hand-scored items. Now, all types are fixed form, meaning that all students are given the same assessment and they receive the same items in the exact same order. So important to note that. The CAASPP and ELPAC speaking and writing interim assessments each only have one type of assessment that is fixed form and has at least one hand-scored item on every assessment. Now, for any CAASPP or ELPAC interim assessment with hand-scored items, it's important to note that you must enter and submit the scores for the hand-scored items into the appropriate scoring system before you will receive those results in CERS. Now, if you'd like to know more about the hand scoring process, including how to hand score items, which is really, as a reminder, it's a local responsibility, we do encourage you to sign up for one of the workshops in the interim assessment hand scoring summer workshop series. And you'll find that link for the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage available in today's resource guide and also on the Padlet. All right, so let's take a closer look at the types of Smarter Balance interim assessments. We're are part of the CAASPP system. Now, Smarter Balanced includes the ELA and mathematics content areas. So this graphic that you see on the next slide is probably familiar for a lot of you. The Smarter Balanced interim assessments for ELA and mathematics allow teachers to gauge student progress throughout the year. And here are 3 types of interim assessments for Smarter Balanced. You'll find the interim comprehensive assessments, or often we call these the ICAs. There are the interim assessment blocks, or what we often call the IABs, and then you'll also find those focused IABs. Now, the Smarter Balanced Interim Assessments Overview document that's linked in the resource guide provides a comprehensive overview for your future reference. This graphic here, you'll see, shows 3 cubes with different amounts of each cube shaded. Now, the cubes represent the 3 types of interim assessments available. So the ICAs that you see there test the same content and report scores on the same scale as the full form summative assessments. Now, these take about the same amount of time to administer as the full form summative assessments because, like the filled cube shows, they cover the same breadth and depth as the spring full summative assessments. But keep in mind that the Smarter Balanced adjusted forms for the summative assessments that are administered in recent years are actually shorter than the ICA. So ICAs are administered on the computer and are a fixed form, but in other words, every student again is going to get the same items in the same order. And as a reminder, they can be administered up to 3 times each year. Now, each ICA includes 1 or more items that will require hand scoring. All right, next up are these IABs, and these focus on smaller sets of related concepts, and they provide more detailed information for instructional purposes than the ICAs, which is represented by the partially shaded cube that you see there on the screen. Now, IABs generally have anywhere from 6 to 18 items, and they can be administered within 1 class period. IABs can be administered an unlimited number of times, but it is important to note that there is currently only 1 form for each IAB. So students will experience the same items if the assessment is given more than 1 time. Now, the focused IABs assess even smaller chunks of content, generally 1 to 3 assessment targets, which is represented by the smallest fraction of cubes shaded. And these ones generally have 10 to 15 items that are focused on very specific concepts. Now, Smarter Balanced interim assessments include high-quality test items that are developed in the same way as those used for the summative assessments and that reflect the same range of item formats. And as a reminder again, they're all available through the CAASPP and ELPAC systems and are important tools, right, to inform teaching and learning. Now, there are several similarities between the ICAs and IABs. They use the same item types and review procedures as the items that appear on the summative assessments. They're all fixed forms, which means that students are taking the same assessment and they're all going to receive the same items and again in the same order. They assess the same Common Core standards and they provide evidence to support Smarter Balanced claims in ELA and mathematics. Now, both types of assessments can be administered online. They use the same delivery software and they can be administered to students in any grade. They adhere to the principles of universal design to be accessible to all students. So this includes the use of simplified graphics and careful use of colors that would not hinder a student who has color blindness. They both use the same accessibility resources available for the summative. So it's a great way there for students to be able to practice using those. Now, there are also some differences between the ICAs and IABs. The ICA follows the same blueprints as the full form summative assessment and takes the same amount of time to administer. So it's important to note that we're referring to the long form summative assessment that's administered through 2019. Now, there's only 1 ICA per grade level and content area, so students So educators actually might need to be really strategic about when the ICAs are administered. And each ICA contains one performance task, which will require hand scoring, but a great opportunity for those students to be able to practice those writing tasks, right? Those performance tasks. IABs assess smaller grain size. So here you're going to find between 3 and 8 target areas. And you'll find that on the IABs, there are about 6 to 18 items. And again, not all of these IABs will require hand scoring. And then we have the focused IABs, which assess no more than 3 assessment targets. And these ones will have about 10 to 15 items per focused IAB. So if you're thinking to yourself, gosh, which Smarter Balance interim assessment do I want to administer? Well, there are more than 260 interim assessments in the Smarter Balance system for you to choose from. So you'll find 156 for ELA and 107 for mathematics, and that number keeps growing each year. So very exciting. Now this year, there are 14 new focused IABs for ELA. In addition, the following materials were replaced. So 1 high school ELA performance task and 1 grade 7 brief write and 1 grade 7 mathematics performance task. So each year we're always getting some changes, some additions to these. So how is it that you know which interim assessment that you want to give your students? Well, once you've identified the purpose for the assessment and the learning targets that you want to assess, a great place to start is the interim assessment lookup tool. And this is linked in your resource guide and also on the Padlet. And we'll discuss the lookup tool a little bit later in today's session. Now, the evidence of student learning that's garnered from these assessments will be different. That really depends on the assessment type. So which one are you using, an ICA or an IAB? It also will depend on the administration method. So are you doing this in a standardized way versus in a non-standardized way? And also your purpose for the assessment. Are you going to be using it as an assessment of learning or perhaps as an assessment for learning? Now, the evidence that's yielded is also influenced by the item type. So are you going to be using ones that are machine scored? Or perhaps are you going to be using interim assessments that may require some hand scoring? So keep in mind that the evidence that you gather from student responses are there to help to inform your instructional practices. So it's important to know what evidence it is that you need before selecting and administering an interim assessment. Now, you'll also have the option of even creating a custom assessment using the interim assessment item portal. And often we call this the IAIP, which we'll discuss later in this section. So some exciting parts coming up. I'm going to hand it over next to Nancy, and she's going to walk us through the CAASPP interims.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. So we're going to take a closer look at the CAASPP, right? So these science ones, which together with the Smarter Balanced ELA and Math make up the CAASPP system. The CAASPP interim assessments are aligned with the California Next Generation Science Standards. Each interim assessment assesses about half of the performance expectations, or PEs, at a grade level or science domain. And just like the Smarter Balance, these CAASPP interim assessments are fixed form, meaning that students can encounter the same items on the same assessment. Every CAASPP interim assessment contains standalone items and then one performance task. The performance task consists of a common stimulus and a set of 4 to 6 related items, including one constructed response item that must be locally hand scored. We've included a link in the resource, the organization of the CAASPP interim assessments flyer, and this is super helpful. So I would definitely go to that and print that. You can find it both in the resource guide as well as the Padlet. So how are they organized? The CAASPP interim assessments are really organized differently depending upon this grade band. In elementary school, the CAASPP interim assessments are organized by grade level, and they're available at grades 3, 4, and 5. All 3 science domains, earth and space science, life science, and physical science, are included with the elementary interim assessments. The engineering PEs are coupled with the other science domains as appropriate for content. In middle and high school, it looks different. The CAASPP interims there are organized by science domain, and they're available in earth and space science, life science, and physical science. And each interim assessment is domain specific. There, the engineering PEs are coupled with the other science domains that are appropriate to the content. Like the Smarter Balanced, the CAASPP interim assessments can be administered to students in any grade level or at any grade band. But keep in mind that each interim assessment is designed to measure the PEs at the intended grade level or grade band science domain. It's exciting because now there are a total of 18 CAASPP interim assessments available, 6 at each grade band. At elementary school, there are 2 at each grade level for grades 3, 4, and 5. In middle and high school, there are 2 assessments per science domain for earth and space science, 2 for life science, and 2 for physical science. These CAASPP interim assessments contain both machine scoreable and hand scored items. All of the CAASPP interim assessments have one constructed response item in the performance task that must be locally hand scored. The constructed response item is really brief. It consists of only a few sentences, and it really shouldn't take too much time to score. All of the items have been field tested and developed using the same rigorous process that was used when they developed the summative CAASPP. So when these CAASPP interim assessments are administered from start to finish, right, via the computer, these student scores are reported in SIRS. But it's only after the scores for the hand-scored items are submitted in the teacher hand scoring system, or THSS, that then we can retrieve all of that data. The SIRS data includes student performance on individual items, including the actual responses, as well as item difficulty, aligned standard, depth of knowledge level, maximum score, and the student score for the item. Individual student reports can also be retracted there. The CAASPP interim assessments use the same scaled scores as the summative CAASPP. So another great tool, right, is we have that. The last I'm going to talk about before I pass it back to Stephanie are these ELPAC interim assessments. And it's exciting that they brought these on board because these are aligned with the California ELD standards for kindergarten through grade 12. They're available for 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Like the Smarter Balanced and CAASPP, the interim assessment means they are fixed form. So students will encounter the same questions if they take the same interim assessment again. But like the CAASPP, there's only one type of interim assessment for ELPAC. And let's look at how these are organized. These are available in the same grade levels and grade spans as we find the summative ELPAC. There are interim assessments in each domain for kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and then for the grade spans 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9, 10, and 11, 12. The ELPAC interim assessments are administered by domain for each grade level and each grade span. There are 56 interim assessments, which is fabulous, right? 8 per grade level or grade span. Each interim assessment includes all 4 domains. We have listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The ELPAC interim assessment, we must remember, is not cumulative, and it can be used independently of each other. Another important consideration when using these ELPAC interim assessments is which domains require hand scoring. So the reading and listening items are machine scored, meaning the items are scored by the machine as the student takes the assessment. But for the speaking domain, the scores must be manually entered during or after the test administration. For the writing domain, there are student responses that must be hand scored. All of these items have been field tested, and the interim assessments will use the same overall scaled score ranges and performance levels as the summative ELPAC. As with the interim assessments, the student scores for the ELPAC interim assessments are reported in SIRS, but only after the scores for all hand-scored items are entered into the appropriate scoring system. The individual student reports are also available here. So entering those scores, right, when you enter them in this hand-scored system, it really depends on the domain or grade level in terms of where you're going to put those. So the data entry phase, or DEI, is where you're going to enter all of the hand-scored item scores for writing at kindergarten through grade 2 and speaking at all grade levels. The teacher hand scoring system is where you're going to enter the scores for writing at grades 3 through 12. And finally, the student testing interface is going to be there to gather all the scores for listening and reading domains for all grade levels. So lots of information, but really lots of great things. So Stephanie's now going to talk us, what about these resources we can use?
I know, right? Well,
Stephanie.
there are some really useful interim assessment resources out there. So the resources that we're going to look at next are designed to support your use of Smarter Balanced, of CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments, and they're all accessible via the CAASPP and ELPAC website, although some will require a TOMS logon to be able to access. So we're going to begin with the interim assessment lookup tool. We mentioned it earlier. It does not require a TOMS logon, and the lookup tool is really there to help you understand which interim assessments are available beginning in August of each school year. Now, the tool includes two sections. So one is the assessments at a glance and also the assessments by grade level. Now, the assessments at a glance section outlines the interim assessments that are available in each content area at every grade level or grade band for CAASPP and at all grade levels and grade spans for ELPAC. And then we have the assessments by grade section, and this specifies the interim assessments for each grade level and grade band for CAASPP. So that'll be for grades 3 through 8 in high school, as well as each grade level and grade span for ELPAC. So that'll be kindergarten, grade 1, and grade 2, and also grade spans 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 and 10, and 11 and 12. Now, information includes the number of items on each assessment, as well as the number that requires hand scoring. Now, we've provided a link to the lookup tool in the resource guide and on the Padlet. So that's a great place for you to start if you're figuring out which interim assessment you want to administer. Next up are the blueprints. Now, the blueprints for CAASPP interim assessments are helpful to understand the content that's included in each interim assessment. The blueprints for ELA and mathematics include information about the claims and targets assessed on each IAB, the number and types of items, and also the depth of knowledge. Now, the CAST blueprints include assessment claims, coverage of PEs by domain, so those performance expectations, the distribution of items by disciplinary core idea, the number and type of items, and also the points per segment. Now, the ELPAC blueprints include assessment claims. You'll find composition by task type for each domain, the number and type of items, and also the points, yes. Now, you're able to find the links for the current blueprints in today's resource guide, so please do check those out. All right, so next we're going to talk about computer administration and accessibility resources. Now, when the interim assessments are administered on a computer, students can practice using the accessibility resources. Now, these accessibility resources provide an equal opportunity for all students. However, they should be used on an assessment only if the student is familiar with the accessibility resource or if something similar is used during instruction and the student has multiple opportunities to be able to practice. Now, the accessibility resources are not just for students with individualized education programs. Some resources, such as the calculator, text-to-speech, and highlighter, are designed as universal tools. And so these are available for all students, although their use may be limited for certain assessments, such as the calculator for mathematics fluency or text-to-speech being used during reading comprehension. Now, the same accessibility resources are available for both the CAASPP and ELPAC interim and summative assessments. So you've got universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. These can all be assigned for interim and summative assessments on the basis of the student's assigned test settings that you'll find in TOMS. However, for the interim assessments, test administrators and test examiners can temporarily assign accessibility resources to students in the test administrator interface. So if accessibility resources are changed in the test administrator interface for those interim assessments, just keep in mind that they are not saved into the system for the summative assessments. So if an educator determines that a student should have the use of an accessibility resource for the summative assessment, then the educator needs to take the appropriate steps to change those test settings that appear in TOMS for the actual summative assessment. So you're going to need to, in that case, contact whoever is your site test coordinator. Now, it's important to remember that practicing on an interim assessment is not the only time that students should have access to and practice with these tools and resources. So think about using these accessibility resources during classroom instruction as well. Now, the accessibility resources page, you'll find it on the CAASPP and ELPAC website, and this provides a range of resources that will support the needs of students when they're taking the interim assessment. So first up here, the accessibility resource demonstration videos. These are going to give you some more information about the common accessibility resources that are available. Next, you'll find the accessibility resources on demand modules, and these are going to provide information about matching accessibility resources to your students' needs. We also have the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix, which displays the embedded and the non-embedded universal tools, those designated supports and accommodations that are allowed as part of the CAASPP and ELPAC system. Now, there's also a link to the importance of implementing CAASPP and ELPAC accessibility resources. And these are voices from educators. And it's a video in which you can hear directly from educators at the San Diego Unified School District about the importance of implementing accessibility resources. So I highly recommend you check it out. Now, the practice and training tests are also other resources that can be used to help familiarize students with the accessibility resources. In fact, the only objective to familiarize students with accessibility resources, then LEAs should use those practice and training tests rather than an interim assessment itself. And finally, we have the Smarter Balanced Accessibility Strategies for Teaching and Learning. This is a web document, and it provides a description of what accessibility resources look like in direct or synchronous and indirect or asynchronous. So please be sure to check out these documents in your resource guide. Now, the next few resources that we're going to look at are important for using the interim assessments, and they're all accessible from the CAASPP webpage. And the first resource is for previewing those test items. So maybe you want to take a look at them, and this is going to be via the interim assessment viewing system. Now, there are two resources for entering scores. We talked about hand scoring earlier, and this is going to be the THSS and also the DEI, so the teacher hand scoring system, and also the data entry interface. And so let's talk about those on the next few slides. The first one here, the interim assessment viewing system. This provides read-only access to interim assessments, so no answers are going to be saved or scored or submitted. And just keep in mind that you're going to need to use a TOMS logon to access the system. Now, the viewing system allows teachers to view specific items for Smarter Balanced, for CAST, and ELPAC before giving an assessment. It's going to help teachers to understand what those types of questions look like and the scope of the content that's contained within each interim assessment. Now, the interim assessment viewing system allows for interactive practice with certain embedded accessibility resources, such as the highlighter and also the line reader. So it's a great place to be able to practice for students using those accessibility resources. Now, as we mentioned, when students take an entire interim assessment from start to finish on the computer, the results are going to be available in SIRS, but only after those scores for all items that require hand scoring are entered into the appropriate system. And so the THSS is used to enter scores for all CAASPP interim assessments. This is also where the ELPAC writing for grades 3 through 12 only scores are entered as well. So the THSS, it offers a communication tools, including the ability for you to be able to add comments for some additional scores as well. But important to note, a log on is required to the THSS. And also note that just this last year, there were some new features that were added. So you can now use the search and filtering options. And there's also some alert icons as well. All right, so the second system is to enter those scores for the hand scored items is into the DEI. And this is used to submit scores for the ELPAC writing for K2, ELPAC speaking for all grade levels and grade spans. And it's also available from the CAASPP and ELPAC website. But keep in mind, a TOMS logon is required. So to learn more about hand scoring, as a reminder, there are those 5 hand scoring workshops for CAASPP and ELPAC, and you'll find those on the upcoming and on-demand training webpage, which is linked. Now, there are additional resources for the ELPAC interim assessments. You'll find these on the Moodle training site or Moodle at moodle.casp-l. And this is under the title ELPAC Interim Assessments Training Resources. And again, you'll find these in your resource guide. And do keep in mind that Moodle does include some secure videos, and it will demonstrate the administration of those different ELPAC domains. Now, finally, for those of you who are already familiar with the hand scoring process, but maybe you just want a refresher, we are super happy to be able to offer the on-demand learning modules that will support Smarter Balance for ELA and mathematics and also CAST and ELPAC. There is one on-demand hand scoring module per CASP content area now, but you'll find that there are 2 on-demand modules for ELPAC and one module that's focused on the speaking domain and one that's focused on the writing domain. So these hand scoring modules are different from the required ELPAC calibration courses in Moodle. And you'll find links to the CAASPP and ELPAC on-demand learning modules in the CAASPP Interim Assessments webpage that we had shared for today. All right, so with that, we have been seeing some incredible questions coming in. Lots of us are back behind the scenes answering them. Please keep them coming. We like being able to hear your voices from the field, and we're in there answering them as we go along. And with that, I believe we're going to go ahead and move into a 10-minute break. So we will see you back here in 10 minutes, and we'll put the time into the chat box. We'll see you soon.
And we welcome you back from break. We hope you had a little time to take care of all your needs. The next section is actually one of my favorite. It is talking about standardized and non-standardized uses of the interim assessment. So we spent a lot of time, right, going over, here's a bunch of details and resources about it, but what are we going to do with it? And that's why I really like this section. So we're going to look at some real world examples. So let's begin first just talking and understanding about the difference between standardized administration and non-standardized. So in standardized administration, we have to remember that in this situation, a student completes the interim assessment individually at a computer, following the same administration procedure as the summative assessments. A standardized administration is always an assessment of learning. And during the standardized administration, an interim assessment is given during regular intervals throughout the school year. And then it allows us to gather that information on students' performance in relation to a set of learning goals or standards. The data, like we talked about earlier, that can then be used to identify students who might benefit from additional instruction or supports, really to make sure, right, that they're on track to meet this end of the year learning goals. But it doesn't give us feedback to support the formative assessment process in the classroom. To that end, you have to use the interim assessments in a non-standardized way. So in a non-standardized administration, it's when these interim assessments are given under conditions that differ in any way from a standardized assessment. They might be used as in a couple of different ways, and we'll go through 2 examples. We have to remember that these are assessments for learning, or they can be used as assessments of learning. So an interim assessment that is given to students can be given when they work in pairs or small groups to complete the assessment, and they might complete it collaboratively. Students might discuss strategies for how they solve the problem and then review and critique each other's responses. A written response item and its rubric can then be shared with students, and the class can also discuss what they notice about what the item asks students to do and what's included at each score point description. And then the students can review 2 example responses or more and compare them using that rubric. Next, they might discuss their reasoning for each score point and make suggestions on how that lower score point response could be improved to achieve a higher score. So there's so many possibilities with this. What are the benefits, right, of each of these? So with a standardized administration, it really helps students gain familiarity with the conditions and the tools that they're going to experience on the state summative assessment. And this, of course, is critical, especially for our third grade students who are just seeing this for the first time. This standardized administration might help reduce test anxiety that they have, since students will then be more comfortable with the testing environment, as well as the testing platform and the types of questions that you see there. A standardized administration can also help identify students who might benefit from additional instruction or support. The intent really is not to use the interim assessment as predictive of student summative assessment performance, but rather as an opportunity, right, for that course correction. So standardized administration can give us group level data to then determine where students are at in their learning at key points throughout the year, to inform teaching and learning and make adjustments for the class. We're going to look at an example of a standardized administration. I hope you glob onto this. This is a great idea. This idea comes from Matt Fredericks, who's a middle school teacher at Ben Franklin Intermediate in the Jefferson Elementary School District. He uses the Smarter Balanced Focused IABs as a pretest and a post-test to help him measure student learning. He selects a Smarter Balanced Focused IAB that assesses specific knowledge and skills, and he administers it to his students in a standardized administration. He then provides support and instruction to his students through lessons and resources, some of which he accessed from Tools for Teachers. And then after a period of time, he administers that exact same focused IAB in standardized administration as a post-test, and he compares the results from the pre-test to the post-test. The results then inform Mr. Fredericks about how his students are progressing toward the grade level standards. It allows him to backward plan from the results of the focused IAB, and he can use the results from the pre-test to immediately identify, right, who is in need of a challenge, who will need more support. You can use the CAASPP and the ELPAC interims in the same exact way to determine progress toward learning goals. Given the single format of the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments, you might consider doing a non-standardized administration. For CAASPP, it would allow you to select items that align to specific PEs during the classroom instruction, or for assessment purposes after that PE is taught. For the ELPAC, you might identify specific types within or across the domains that can create an interim assessment that can measure specific skills or knowledge. For both CAASPP and ELPAC, you would need to hand score the items, including any of the hand scored items. So going back to Matt's example, the benefits have been outstanding. And here's what he has found. This pre and post cycle has really helped him establish grade level expectations with students. They can focus their goals for achieving success on the grade level content. The focused IABs have also built on each other in a way that makes the next unit seem equally relevant, and learning loss from earlier in the year has diminished. Students get immediate feedback on their performance while the test is still fresh in their mind. Using the computer-based Smarter Balanced interim assessments gives students familiarity with the online testing system as they access the same types of questions, how they look, how they're answered, as the end-of-year assessments. But most importantly, these focused IABs in this example that Matt has used has helped to create a strong class culture. Students want to know how they did on their pre-test, on their post-test. And Mr. Fredericks really sees this as a building a positive class culture that is filled with accountability and confidence for his students. And he's found that it's really been a great tool for collaboration between he and his grade level partner. So again, lots of ideas that you can grasp onto. So let's think about what is the benefit of using it in a non-standardized administration. And I'll give you an example. Right? One of the best benefits is that you can use them in ways that best support the specific needs of your classroom. Might be very different if you're teaching third grade versus if you're teaching 11th grade. Might look different. In this example, in terms of non-standardized administration, students can work collaboratively to experience how their peers might approach problems and reach conclusions. And this might give students additional strategies that they can then draw on later. It can also help students become familiar with the assessment language and the concepts, sort of in this low-stakes testing environment with ample support. In a non-standardized administration, teachers can then determine what's the pacing going to look like, the depth, the complexity of the items to match where students are and what they need to work on next. You can use these interims as tools to support your formative assessment practice by asking students to share what were their sequence of steps that they went through as they worked to solve a problem, or as they engaged in class discussion to justify their responses and evidence. So let's look at a real world example. This actually comes from my former district of how we used this. In this example, we used the ELA interim assessment in a non-standardized manner as a tool to support the formative assessment process. Specifically, it was used so students could better understand how they would develop well-written responses supported with evidence. So in this case, the students went through an ELA performance task. It was so, and I'll kind of go through the steps. They read the directions together and they discussed what needed to be done. Then they worked through a close reading of the passage, note-taking and note-making, as well as practicing how to draft thoughtful and thorough responses. Finally, they worked through the writing together to craft thoughtful and thorough responses that could attend to the dimensions of the rubric. During the administration, the teachers asked questions of students, providing additional supports as were needed, and students then worked in pairs to reflect on the responses in relation to the rubric to see how well their responses were meeting that expectation. So we're seeing here a lot of establishing grade level expectations, students getting practice and subsequent feedback instantly. They are growing familiarity with the task. And then, of course, that strong class culture. This next slide shows us this Clover graphic that you'll notice here. It represents the components of the formative assessment process, right? It includes these 4 components. We see on one of the 4 leaves, we see clarify, we see elicit, we see interpret, and then act. This process is iterative, and it can begin with any component. You can learn more about this process in webinar 1 of this webinar series. So in the non-standardized administration of the particular interim assessment that I'm talking about, the group moved through this formative assessment process. And when administering this interim this way, it was an assessment for learning, not an assessment of learning. Teachers began by gathering evidence during the time they worked with students. And then students needed, they really found out students needed a lot more practice with elaboration. So as such, the next steps that happened were lessons which strengthened students' writing in this way. And teachers were able to access those lessons through tools for teachers. In your future planning, as you think about this, you can use Smarter, Balanced, and the CAASPP in this same process to determine what it is that your students need more support with. It's always better when we see things, right? So I can talk, but let's see it. So this video that we're going to watch a short clip of comes from the CDE Formative Assessment in Action video series, and the link you can find in Padlet and in the resource guide. This Formative Assessment in Action video series features members of the state network of teachers, and it really helps us demonstrate formative assessment strategies in the classroom. I know lots of you have been asking questions about PLC in the Padlet. This is a great resource for you to go to and watch with your colleagues during a PLC. In this video, grade 6 students are using a Smarter Balanced sample item and the corresponding rubric to target and improve writing skills. And the class is being led by Christina Lambie, the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning in the Woodland Joint Unified School District. So let's watch this video. They're going to get it queued up while we're watching. Okay, really quickly, we're going to look at how are students interacting with the interim assessment item. Keep in mind the way in which the assessment is administered will matter. And then think about how you might do this. All right, let's go ahead.
Provided by Smarter Balanced, often in the non-standardized way. So often we will see partners working in the assessment together. They might be logged in and they're having a discussion about the problem that they're working on, or they're composing a piece of writing together. That's really the power of the non-standardized way of administering these interim assessments, is that teachers have a lot of flexibility in how to go about doing that. You don't have to give your students all of the assessment items. You can focus on one. Okay, so
Great. So of course, always seeing it, right, is always better for us. So as you think about that, we're curious about how you might use interim assessments within what you're going to be planning forward for next year. Standardized, non-standardized, etc. So we'll move ahead, and I'd like you to shift over to Padlet and think about how are you most likely to use, or how do you currently use these different assessments? Standardized use only, non-standardized use, or a mixture of standardized and non-standardized, or you don't know, you're not sure. And with that, we'll switch over to Stephanie and also capture your ideas.
Yeah, go ahead and fill out that section there. It's on the Padlet. We have that poll that's there. If you could go ahead, that's perfect. Yeah. And let us know how it is that you are currently using those interim assessments with your students. You'll find that column that's there. I see votes that are coming in right now, Nancy.
It looks like it. Awesome. So it looks like I'm noticing, it looks like people are using this mix. That's really resonating to the top. And I know there's still some of you that don't know, you're not sure. I hope by the time you leave us today, you will be able to better understand how you can put those into action. So with that, Stephanie's going to take us into the next section. We're going to learn a little, yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, we're going to be moving on next. We're going to share some information about CERS, some upcoming training opportunities, and also some resources. So let's talk first about what is CERS. Well, CERS is a secure website for LEA staff that serves as a one-stop shop for individual and also for group student results for CAASPP and ELPAC summative and interim assessments. Now, CERS provides an overall scale score, an achievement level or a performance level, and other assessment data such as composite or domain information, as well as detailed information about interim assessment results. Now, its design was influenced by California educators, and it is a fully accessible online reporting platform that connects assessment data and instructional resources in one place to provide educators with data to support teaching and learning. Now, we'll be spending a little less time on CERS during this training, as the CDE holds dedicated CERS trainings, which we'll go over in just a few slides. So let's talk about the assessment data that's available in CERS. Now, summative assessment results are available in CERS for the following assessments: Smarter Balanced Summative Assessments for ELA and Mathematics. You'll find the data there for CAST, for the California Alternate Assessments, or CAAs, for ELA and Mathematics, the CAA for Science, the California Spanish Assessment, the Summative ELPAC, and also the Summative Alternate ELPAC. Now, the interim assessments that are administered in their entirety on a computer include the Smarter Balance for ELA and Mathematics, CAST, and ELPAC interim assessments. CERS offers a real-time reporting for those interim assessments. So data is available for the Smarter Balanced ELA and Mathematics and ELPAC interim assessments that do not contain hand-scored items after administration is complete. Now, for all those assessments that require hand scoring, including all of those cost interim assessments, results in CERS will be ready in about 20 minutes after the scores for hand-scored items are submitted into the appropriate system. So that's going to be that teacher hand scoring system or the data entry interface, depending on the content area and grade level. And regular results feeds will occur for those summative assessments each spring. So you always want to be checking in CERS to be able to check that data. Now, the CERS resources webpage, which is available on the CAASPP and ELPAC website, contains links to CERS, the CERS sandbox, the CERS user guides, and also the CERS instructional videos. The sandbox does not require a TOMS logon, and it allows users to engage with non-secure, fictitious, individual, and aggregated student data both from the interim and also from the summative assessments, and from the perspective of different roles for all 4 content areas. So you can find data in the sandbox for ELA, for mathematics, for science, and also for ELPAC. Now, the SIRS user guide is a web-based manual that describes the features of SIRS, and it provides detailed instructions for using each feature. And this includes common scenarios that encompass related features. It also outlines the various user roles for using the CAASPP and ELPAC systems, and also the permissions for each. And it provides information on creating and managing student groups so that teachers have access to their students' data. Now, the SIRS Interpretive Guide is designed to help educators and other interest holders interpret and explain CAASPP and ELPAC interim and summative assessment results, and it also provides guidance to consider when analyzing results for different purposes, including accountability and also for classroom instruction. Both the SIRS User Guide and the SIRS Interpretive Guide cover all CAASPP and ELPAC assessments, including the interim assessments, and they're fully web-based, just like the interim assessment user guide and also that TOMS user guide. Now, there are also SIRS instructional videos, and there are 12 quick reference guides that address the most common tasks in SIRS. So you'll find a link to all of these terrific SIRS resources webpage. It's in today's resource guide and also on the Padlet. Now, for 2026-27, the SIRS Essentials Training Series is free of cost, and it's available for all educators. So these quick 1-hour topic-focused live virtual sessions are facilitated by SIRS experts who are from California local education agencies. Now, the sessions are designed to give educators at all levels the skills and the confidence to use SIRS effectively. So topics include creating and managing student groups, creating customized groups, understanding the system, and also accessing interim and summative data, and also some of those related features in there. Now, in addition to those live trainings, the CDE offers 2 recently updated micro-learning video series. So the first one is called the Introduction to SIRS for Teachers, and also the Introduction to SIRS for Test Coordinators and Administrators. And these videos range from 1 to 10 minutes in length, and they're organized by category. So be sure to check those out. Now, you can also register for the SIRS Essential Training Series and access those micro-learning videos from the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage. And again, you'll find that link in today's resource guide. All right, so we'll pause for a moment. Nancy, is there maybe a question we want to highlight? Are we in there taking a look at some of those terrific questions that are coming in?
Yeah, there's so many questions, but I'm not seeing any necessarily that are pertaining to that.
Yeah, well, keep them coming because, we're all in there. Nancy and I are in there. Folks from West End are in there. CDE, ETF, we're all in there kind of answering those questions and monitoring it. So keep those questions coming as we continue. Okay, we'll move into our next section, which is on resources and practical application of those interim assessments. So we'll continue providing that overview of some of those interim assessment resources that are available to you, and also their connection to classroom practice. So we're going to do a quick overview of these resources, and then at the end, we're going to have a little bit of time for you to explore a resource of your choosing in our Notice Wonder activity. But we encourage you to explore each of these resources on your own, but just keep in mind that a TOMS logon may be required for some of them. All right, so we've grouped the resources that we're going to be highlighting by the assessment that they support. So this means into resources that support the Smarter Balance, and also those that support CAST and ELPAC. And then at the end, we'll cover resources that support all 3 assessments. So let's start off with the resources that are designed to support Smarter Balanced Assessment System for ELA and mathematics. And so this first resource is what we call the IAIP. Now, the IAIP is a Smarter Balance tool that allows educators to view individual ELA and mathematics interim assessment test questions. So it allows for flexible use of the interim assessments to support teaching and learning in the classroom. So educators can find, they can select, and they can print individual items and also the answer keys that align to specific criteria and use them as tools to support teaching and learning in the classroom. And so that also includes the formative assessment process. Now, remember, the interim assessment items are considered secure and copyrighted. So it's prohibited for any items to be uploaded or posted to third-party websites or those applications. And so that includes not uploading them into any AI, right? So interim assessments and their items are intended to be teacher and student facing only. So they should not be taken home and they should be destroyed after use if they were printed. Now, the IAIP can be accessed from Tools for Teachers or from the CAASPP and ELPAC website on the Smarter Balanced Interim Assessment Resources section of the CAASPP and ELPAC Interim Assessments webpage. Now, the sample items website from Smarter Balanced includes examples of test questions that are used on Smarter Balanced for ELA and mathematics assessment. So these sample items are not secure. So that means they can be shared with all audience, including students and their families. So this is one of the few resources that you can share with everyone. Now, items can be browsed by grade level, by subject area, by claim, target, and standard, and they can be used with students in a non-standardized setting to support the formative assessment practice in the classroom. Now, you can access the Smarter Balance sample items website from an interim assessment connections playlist, which you can find in Tools for Teachers, but do note that Tools for Teachers does require a logon to access full resources. The sample items website does not. So a good rule of thumb to use is that if you need to log on, then the resource is secure. Now, the Smarter Content Explorer is a website where educators can learn about the relationship between Smarter Balanced Assessment items and the standards. So Smarter Content Explorer assists educators by making Smarter Balanced item specifications easier to access and use, by helping educators understand the development of Smarter Balanced test items, and also providing support when planning instruction or building curricular supports to align with Common Core state standards. Now, the information provided in Smarter Content Explorer is the same information that's included from the item specifications. It's just in a more user-friendly and easier to use interface. Now, the CAASPP and ELPAC website also includes resources for educators that are interested in using tools offered through the Lexile and Quantile Hub. Now, the Hub contains instructional planning resources for educators and a variety of tools that support the monitoring of student growth in reading and mathematics towards goals of college and career readiness. So you'll find things like grade level charts and growth planners, the Find a Book Quick Start Guide is there, and even more. So educators can also look up products that report Lexile and Quantile measures as well. So the Lexile and Quantile Hub, it offers opportunities for you as educators to learn about tools and resources that demonstrate student learning needs in reading and mathematics so that teachers can identify and use appropriate instructional strategies and interventions with their students. And so this includes determining the level of science reading materials to ensure that they are appropriate for students in a particular grade level. So you'll find the links to the Hub and to the Lexile and Quantile measures webpage on the CAASPP and ELPAC website. And again, these are provided in your resource guide. So next, we'll look at resources that support CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessment. So first off, the scoring materials, and these are all available at TOMS. The test content and answer key documents for CAASPP and ELPAC include all of the questions, including all of those machine scorable, hand-scored items. And so teachers can use these documents to select and use test items that are aligned with specific criteria, or perhaps create their own interim assessment for non-standardized use to support teaching and learning in the classroom. Now, the answer keys for all machine scorable items are available in the test content and answer key documents. And please do note that for CAST, the answer keys include responses for all of the machine scoreable items for the performance task. So rubrics for the hand scored items, as well as all of those scoring materials that are needed for hand scoring are available in the training guide and exemplars. And so we'll take a look at that next. And do note that these are secure materials. And again, they should be accessed only by LEA staff and students to support classroom practice. So the training guide and exemplars document contains all the scoring materials that are needed to score those hand-scored items. And so that's going to include the stimulus or stimuli, the constructed response prompt, the scoring rubric, and alignment information. Also, sample scored student responses are there. You'll find rationales for them, for those scores that are given. And also there's a check set and a check set scoring key that you can use for training purposes. So the training guide and exemplars can be accessed through TOMS in the same location as the test content and answer key documents. The California assessment system also contains annotated responses for Smarter Balance for CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. So the Smarter Annotated Response tool for ELA provides information on how student writing is scored on Smarter Balance constructed response items and also on those performance tasks. And this tool shows examples of student writing. You'll find scoring annotations or justifications and rubrics to help understand what to look for when reviewing student responses and also to understand where to provide support to students in a specific writing area. Now for CAST, in addition to the annotated responses in the training guide and exemplars documents in TOMS, there are also annotated responses for selected constructed response items on the CAST practice test. And these annotated examples can be found on the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments webpage on the CAASPP and ELPAC website. Now, the ELPAC interim assessment resources include anchors and training sets for scoring, speaking, and writing in the training guide and exemplars resource in TOMS. Now, these resources provide opportunities to practice scoring on your own or perhaps with your colleagues. And this really helps to standardize and to calibrate the scoring of student work samples. So lots of insight can be gained from scoring student work, and it's used really to inform that formative assessment process. So again, all of these links in today's resource guide. Now we realize that there are lots of tools available. So there's a PDF flyer. It's called the Formative Assessment Tools to Support Teaching and Learning. And it has links and descriptions to help you identify which one best fits your needs. So the document outlines the tools listed here. You'll find for the tools for teachers website, that IAIP, the Interim Assessment Viewing System, Smarter Content Explorer website, accessibility strategies for teaching and learning, the Smarter Balance Sample Items website, annotated student response tool, and also for SIRS. And it also provides information about how each tool supports the formative assessment process. So this document includes an asterisk next to each of the tools that does require that TOMS login. So makes it easy to be able to identify which of those tools are publicly available and which one of those tools you'll need to have access through your TOMS login. All right, Nancy is going to take us through a terrific Notice and Wonder activity next. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. So now that was a lot, right? You looked at all those resources. We are going to engage in a Notice and Wonder activity that's going to allow you an opportunity to explore one of the resources that Stephanie just introduced. The strategy comes directly from the formative assessment strategies that you can find in Tools for Teachers. It invites learners to unpack problems before they begin work solving, creating, and accessing content. And it can promote academic safety by encouraging learners to share their thoughts without any expectation to answer or solve a problem. So the activity that we're going to do today has been adapted to meet our needs for today's session. Each of the resources can be adapted to meet your own needs as well. So first, what we're going to do is ask you to choose one of the resources that we introduced today. Note that the IAIP and the Interim Assessment Viewing System require a logon. And then what you'll also see is Tools for Teachers that requires that logon. So choose one of the other resources if you do not have your login credentials today. And each one of the resources is linked in your resource guide so that you can get there quicker. We would like you to spend the next 10 minutes exploring the resource you've selected and responding to the questions. So you're going to spend the first 5 minutes exploring that resource, consulting any associated user guides, and getting to know the information that's provided. Remember that all the resources are linked there. The last thing you're going to do is spend the last 5 minutes answering the related questions in the Notice and Wonder activity in section 6 in the resource guide. But you can also find those questions in Padlet, and we'll be looking at Padlet to see those responses. I will let you know when the 5-minute time is up so that you can begin writing your questions down. Okay, so we're going to have you head off. Go explore a resource. We'll call everyone back together in 10 minutes. All right, so at this point, you've had time to look at that resource. We would like you now to transition over to Padlet and begin to put down your Notice and Wonder thoughts in Padlet. All right, so our time is up in terms of reviewing resources. I know that some of you are still posting questions and thoughts and Notice and Wonder in Padlet. Some of the most interesting things I think I've noticed in there is individuals are taking time to really look at those resources. One of the great ideas from that is you're about to embark on a brand new school year. And so are there ways that you could repeat the activity we did today with either your grade level colleagues or a group of students at the school, or a group of teachers at the school, so that you could learn even more about these resources and then work together to figure out how these resources can really help support you into next year. And so with that, at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Megan, who's going to close us out for the day.
I can get everything working again. Thank you, Nancy. And we have just a couple more slides to go before we close for today. We want to thank you for joining us for today's professional learning experience. There are a lot of questions on Padlet that have been coming in. We've been referring to those. We are still in the process of responding to those. So if you don't see a response at the end of, during the session, come back in a day or two and check and make sure. And again, if you have additional questions that arise after the conclusion in about just a couple minutes, please send an email to caloutreach@ets.com. So we just want to review quickly our learning goals for today, were that you should now understand the different ways in which the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments can be used to inform instruction and the available resources to support the use of CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments in the classroom. So hopefully by now you can identify at least and use the different CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments to inform instruction and use available resources. Dive into those resources. There are a lot available, so get to know them really well. Hopefully if you've discovered something new today, you can learn a lot more about it before classes start pretty soon. Okay, so to close our learning time today, we're going to turn on the chat one more time, and we would love to hear from you. What is a big idea from this session that you could use to inform your practice? Any thoughts about the big idea? Thank you. Okay, so frequent and quick checkpoints. Yes, absolutely. A lot coming in really fast. There are many different ways to help gauge and monitor student learning, right? Absolutely. Using focused interim assessment blocks to support instruction. Great. Love it. Incorporate questions that match the rigor of the text into my classes. Yep, the interim assessments will help with that, determining where the rigor is. There's so many good ideas in here. There's ideas about pre and post test, using interim informal assessment to support instruction. Absolutely, there's great ideas. All right. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We do have one more big ask. We are continually improving our professional learning. I would love to hear from you about your experience today. So there's a link to a survey. You can access the link via the link dropped in chat, scan that QR code. We'll also have an email to you with a link to the survey if you don't have time to fill it out right after this. But we would really love to hear from you. Again, thank you so much. And remember, there are additional offerings. You can go to that upcoming and on-demand webpage to sign up for additional webinars or the workshops for hand scoring. Thank you so much. We hope you have a fabulous rest of your Friday.